In times gone by, people lived very simple lives. They worked all of the hours God gave to them. They ate if they could afford to, and they slept in whatever time there was left over. And pretty much the only thing that they had to look forward to were the festivals of Easter and Christmas and summer and Halloween. And at these times of year, even the poorest of people, well, they would have something to eat, something to drink, and they would have parties for dancing. And well, some villages were very lucky because they maybe had their own musician to play for the dancing. Other villages, they would have to save up all year round to afford a musician. And in the very poorest of villages, they would have to make do with the beat of the drum and the clap of the hand. And it was in one of these very, very poor villages that there lived a girl called Sula. And well, I suppose you could say Sula was a little bit of a tomboy. She didn't always do what her parents asked her to do. And it was almost Halloween, and they didn't have anyone to play music for their party, for the dancing. And well, even though Sula had been told by her mother not to go outside of the village boundary and never ever to speak to strangers, every single day she sneaked outside of the village. And it was almost Halloween, and she came to a great, long, golden beach. And on the beach stood a giant oak tree. And beneath the oak tree stood 3 old women, and they were talking. And they didn't notice Sula. She sort of sneaked up behind them and had a listen. And she heard them say that they had seen a man, a strange looking man with jet black hair. His eyes were the colour of 2 pieces of coal. He was tall and he was thin, and he's wearing a dark tweed suit. Around his neck was wrapped a scarf. A big long scarf made up of all of the colours of the rainbows, reds and greens and yellows and blues. And he was carrying a fiddle. And he was a musician, and he didn't have anywhere to play music for the dancing on Halloween. Well, when Sula heard this, she was determined she would find this man and bring him to her village to play music for the dancing, for the party. And so even though Sula's mother had told her never to go outside of the village boundary and never to speak to strangers, every day she sneaked out looking for him. And there was not a sign of the man, not until it was actual day of Halloween itself. And there he was. He was sitting in the road with his legs outstretched in front of him. And she knew it was him because he was wearing the dark tweed suit, and he was tall and he was thin. He had jet black hair and his eyes were like 2 pieces of black coal. In the road next to him, well, there was his fiddle, his violin, in the case, and around his neck was wrapped the long scarf made up of all the colours of the rainbow. Well, Sula rushed straight over to him. She said, Mister, she said, Mister, would you come to our party? Will you come and play for the dancing tonight? And he looked at Sula and he said, oh yes, I'd love to. But there's just one thing though, Mister, she said, we haven't got any money to pay for you. Oh, that doesn't matter, he said. That doesn't matter at all. Well, when Sula got home, she thought that her mother would be delighted that she'd found a violin player to come and play music for the party for the dancing, but she wasn't. She was absolutely furious. Sula, she said, have I not told you never, ever, ever go outside of the village boundary, and have I not made it clear? You never, ever speak to strangers. You don't know who this man is. You don't know what he's done. And now you're meaning to tell me he's coming here, to our village, to our party? Well, I'm telling you, missy, there'll be no party for you. And tonight you can spend the evening with your granny in the cottage looking after the babies. Oh, poor Sula. She thought she'd done a good thing bringing this man there to the village. And there she was, as the party was underway, in her granny's cottage, looking after the babies. And she could hear, outside, the sound of fiddle music, the sound of the violin being played for the party, for the people to dance. And as Sula walked to the window and she looked outside, she could see a glow in the sky. It was orange, because on the village green there was a huge big bonfire with flames licking up into the sky. And even though she'd been told not to, Sula put a hand on the door to the cottage, and she turned it, and she pushed it open, and she walked out over the purple, heather-filled moorland until she came to the village green. And there was a huge bonfire, its flames licking up to the sky, and around the bonfire danced all of the people from the village. Round and round they danced, and there was the fiddle player playing his violin. And it was music like you've never heard before in your life. And the faster that he played, the faster that the people danced. Round and round the fire they danced in reels and jigs and reels and jigs. But when Sula looked at their faces, she thought they didn't look happy. They looked confused, almost like they were under some strange sort of magical spell. When all of a sudden, bang, one of the strings on the fiddle player's fiddle snapped, and in that second, all of the people from the village, they fell down onto the floor. Well, Sula watched the fiddle player, and there was a little clock with a clock tower, and outside it there was an old bench, an old wooden bench, and she watched him. He walked over and he sat down and he took his fiddle and he took the string that was broken out and he threw it down on the floor. He reached into his pocket, he took another violin string and he strung it onto the violin, and he took the bow, and as he was about to pull it over, bang! Another string broke. And he was angry and he took it out and he threw it down on the floor. Well, he rummaged round in his pocket and he found another string and he strung that one on. But bang! Another string snapped. He was furious and he took it off and he threw it down on the floor. This time when he reached in his pocket and he took the string and he strung it on his fiddle and he took the bow and he drew it across the violin. Music like you've never heard before in your life came out and began to sing, and in that moment everybody got up off the floor and they began to dance round and round and round, and the faster he played the faster they danced, furiously hurtling round, and the flames from the fire cast strange, eerie shadows across their face. And they didn't even notice Sula as she walked through the crowds And she went over to that little church with the clock tower, to the bench where the fiddle player had been sitting, and she sat down looking at the people. When all of a sudden, all she heard was this. Sula, Sula. Who's that calling my name? She wondered. She checked round. She couldn't see anyone, and then she heard it again. Sula, Sula. Who is it? She felt a chill go down her back, and her hair was standing on end, and she thought maybe it was a granny had come to look for her, and she looked around and she couldn't see anyone, and then she heard it again. It said, Sula, Sula. And she thought that the sound was coming from the ground, from her feet, and she looked down on the floor and she saw 3 golden strings. And Sula picked the strings up and she put them to her and she said, "Who are you?" And the voices said, "We are the souls of all of the people that the devil has stolen in his dance. For that man you've brought to the village is no ordinary fiddle player. He is Nick of the cloven hooves and the horns. He's the devil, and tonight when he dances out to the village and the clock strikes 12, the people will dance behind him, and he will steal their souls for all of eternity." Said Sula, but I brought him here. I brought that man here to the village, and it's my fault, and there must be something I can do. What can I do? What can I do? And the voices said, "The only way to break the devil's spell is tonight when the people dance out to the village behind him and the clock strikes 12. You must throw us down onto the floor, and if he dances over us the spell will be broken, but if not, he will steal their souls for all of eternity." Sula, she looked at the clock tower, and it was 1 minute to 12, and he could see already that he was dancing out to the village, playing the fiddle, and the people were dancing behind him. And even though she was terrified, she rushed up and she took the strings and she threw them down on the floor. And the fiddle player, well, he danced over the 3 golden strings, playing his fiddle. And in that moment, all of the people stopped dancing and they looked confused, as if they'd been under a magic spell. And the fiddle player, well, he just gave Sula a big wink, and everybody watched as he danced up into the sky playing his fiddle, and his huge scarf unwrapped itself and it burst out into all of the colours of the rainbow, into reds and pinks and gold and green. And you can still see those colours dancing even now in the night sky. And where my family come from in Donegal in Ireland, they call them will-o'-the-wisp. Often you hear them called aurora borealis, but most often we like to call them the northern